The phone buzzed twice against the granite counter before she even looked up. "See," Megan said, sliding it across to me, screen still lit. "Nothing. Look for yourself. My name is Ryan." And that was the moment I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt something colder settle into my chest, because I hadn't asked her to show me anything. I'd said one sentence, "You've been distracted lately," and she'd already reached for her phone like a woman rehearsing a defense she'd been waiting to give. I'm 38. I build bridges for a living, or the calculations that keep them standing, which amounts to the same thing. I spend my days making sure things that look solid actually are. It should have made me better at noticing when something in my own life had started to bend under weight it wasn't built for. It didn't. Megan is 35, works in marketing at Holbrook and Voss downtown, and for 10 years, she has been the person I came home to. We have 2 kids, Lily, 8, missing her front tooth and proud of it, and Caleb, 5, who still climbs into our bed most nights around 3 in the morning without either of us fully waking up to stop him. I took her phone. I remember the weight of it, the warmth from her palm still on the case. Text messages, open, scrolled to the top. Nothing. Photos, vacation pictures, Caleb's soccer team, a recipe screenshot. I handed it back. "I wasn't accusing you of anything," I said, which was a lie, or close enough to one that it didn't matter. "You've been weird for 2 weeks," she said. "I just wanted you to see there's nothing to see." I nodded. I believed her, mostly. The way you believe a familiar shape in the dark, because you've walked past it 1,000 times, and it has never once been anything else. It was a Tuesday in March, and outside the kitchen window the last of the snow was going gray and soft along the fence line. Megan turned back to the stove, and I watched the muscles in her shoulders, and I told myself that was the whole conversation. I told myself a lot of things that spring. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't understand for another 6 weeks, was that the phone she'd handed me had one thing on it she'd forgotten to close. Not a message, not a photo, an app, still logged in, still running quietly in the background, the kind of thing you only notice if you already have a reason to look. I didn't have a reason yet. That night, I didn't look again. 3 days earlier, I'd noticed she'd started taking her phone into the bathroom when she showered. Small thing. I told myself she was reading the news. 2 weeks before that, she'd started closing her laptop screen a half-second faster when I walked into a room, and I told myself she was working on something for my birthday, which was 6 weeks off, plenty of time for a woman like Megan to plan something and not want me to see it early. I told myself is a phrase I used a lot that spring, and looking back now, I can hear how much work that phrase was doing. Every version of the truth I built for myself required Megan to be planning something good. It never once occurred to me that she might be planning nothing at all, that she might simply be improvising, day by day, trying to hold 2 lives steady in the same set of hands. We'd been married 10 years that June. We met in college, in Columbia, in a shared econ class neither of us cared about, and got married 4 years later in her parents' backyard in Springfield, under a tent that leaked in one corner all night. 10 years. 2 kids. A house with a mortgage we could actually afford, which felt like an achievement most of our friends hadn't managed. On paper, we were the couple other couples pointed to. On the Wednesday after the phone incident, I picked Lily up from her friend Ava's birthday party, and Ava's mother, Denise, said something in passing that I filed away without understanding I was filing it. "Tell Megan I said hi. Haven't seen her at drop-off in weeks. She always seemed to be running late these days. HM?" I laughed it off. Megan had gotten a promotion in January, more accounts, more client dinners, more reasons to be running behind. That was the story I had, and it was a good story because it was almost entirely true. Almost. That night, after the kids were down, I sat on the edge of the bed and watched Megan take her earrings out in front of the mirror, one at a time, setting each on the dresser with a small precise click. I thought about asking her something. I don't even know what. I think some part of me, the part that notices when a beam is bearing more than it was designed for, already knew that whatever question I asked would only get me a version of the truth engineered to hold. I didn't ask. I got into bed. I told myself it was a good marriage having a hard season, the way all marriages do eventually, and that the hard season would pass the way the others had. I was wrong about the season. I was wrong about almost everything that spring. But I want to stop here, at the beginning, because this is where it started for me. Not with proof, not with a confession, but with a phone slid across a granite counter and a woman who wanted me to stop looking before I'd even really started. Our mornings ran on a schedule so exact you could set a clock by it. Not because we were rigid people, but because two working parents with two kids under 10 don't survive any other way. Megan up at 6:15, coffee before either of us spoke a full sentence. Lily's lunch packed the night before because mornings were for arguing about socks. Caleb refusing to wear anything but the one shirt with the dinosaur on it, which we'd learned to have 3 of in rotation. For the first few weeks of March, none of that changed. That's the thing about a life quietly coming apart. It doesn't announce itself. It rides inside the same routines you've always trusted, using them as cover. What changed were smaller things. Megan started running 2 miles most mornings before work, which she hadn't done since before Caleb was born. She lost 11 pounds by April, and when I said she looked great, she smiled in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes, like she'd caught herself being complimented for the wrong reason and didn't know how to correct it without giving something away. She started wearing perfume to the office. Not a lot. Just enough that I noticed it on her collar when she leaned in to kiss Lily goodnight. A scent I didn't recognize. Something warmer and more expensive than the one she'd worn for years. I didn't ask about it. I told myself people change their perfume. People start running. These are not confessions. These are Tuesdays. Client dinners started running later. Twice in April she came home after 10, hair slightly damp like she'd redone it in a bathroom somewhere. Cheeks flushed in a way that could have been wine or could have been something else entirely. And both times she talked more than usual about the dinner itself. Who ordered what? Which client complained about the service? The way people over-explain things that don't need explaining. I noticed. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easier to tell this story as a man who was blindsided, who had no warning at all. That's not what happened. I noticed almost everything. I just didn't let myself finish the thought each time it started, because finishing the thought meant asking a question I wasn't ready to hear the answer to. Conflict, for me, has always been something to manage quietly rather than confront directly. Smooth it over, wait it out, trust that things settle themselves if you just give them enough room. It served me well at work. It served me terribly at home that spring. Somewhere in early April, I noticed she'd started angling her phone face down on the counter. Every time, a small automatic motion, like a reflex that had built itself without her quite deciding to build it. I picked it up once, to move it out of the way of a spill, and she crossed the kitchen faster than the moment required and took it from my hand. Not sharply, not suspiciously, just quickly, the way you'd grab something before it fell. Sorry, she said, laughing a little. Habit. Work stuff. I let it go. I want to stop here for a second, because if you've ever caught a small detail like that, something too fast, too automatic, too careful, and talked yourself out of what it might mean simply because the alternative felt unbearable, you already understand exactly why I didn't push it. I didn't know it then. This is what she was living through, on a Thursday in early April, the night she came home smelling like someone else's cologne, and I didn't ask. I told myself I'd stop after that dinner. I remember standing in the parking garage afterward with my hand actually on the door handle of my own car, telling myself, this ends tonight. You go home. You end it properly. In words, not in silence. And then my phone lit up. A message, just 3 words, and I put my hand back down and got in his car instead of mine. I told myself it was the last time. I told myself that for 3 weeks running. Each time I believed it a little less, and each time I did it anyway, because stopping felt like admitting I'd become someone I didn't recognize, and starting again felt, God help me, like being seen for the first time in years. That's what she told me, much later. I knew none of it yet. That night, I just noticed the smell of cologne and told myself it was probably just the restaurant. Lily's school held a spring parent-teacher conference the second week of April, and Megan missed it. Said a client call ran long. Texted me an apology with 3 exclamation points that felt performed rather than felt. I went alone. Her teacher, Mrs. Hallworth, mentioned Lily had drawn a family picture that week where Megan was standing slightly apart from the rest of us, off to the side of the house, not touching anyone's hand. Kids draw what they notice, Mrs. Hallworth said gently, not what it means. I told myself Lily was going through a phase. I put the comment in a drawer in my mind and didn't open it again for weeks. That same week, I ran into Marcus Feld at Megan's office holiday mixer. No, that's wrong. It wasn't a mixer, it was a Friday pickup. I'd swung by to grab her for an early dinner reservation, and Marcus was walking her out to the lobby, laughing at something, his hand briefly at the small of her back in the casual way coworkers touch each other and mean nothing by it. I shook his hand. Younger guy, easy smile, copywriter, the kind of charm that works because it never seems to be trying. I thought nothing of it. I thought, nice guy, and then I thought about the reservation, and then I forgot him completely for almost a month. Looking back now, that handshake sits differently in my memory than it did in the moment. At the time it was nothing, a hand at a lobby exit, gone before I'd finished noticing it. I wouldn't call it nothing anymore. By the end of April, the running had become 5 days a week. The perfume had become permanent. The phone stayed face down on every surface in the house, angled just slightly toward her, never toward me, and I had started, without quite admitting it to myself, keeping a private tally of things I wasn't asking about. I didn't know yet what I was building toward. I just knew the tally kept getting longer, and some nights I lay awake next to her doing the math and coming up with a number I didn't want to name. The turn came on a Sunday in the second week of May, and it came from Caleb, of all people, who has never once in his 5 years understood the weight of anything he says. We were in the car, the three of them and me, driving back from his soccer practice, and out of nowhere he said, from the back seat, entirely unprompted, "Mommy's phone made the boop sound again." The one that's not the regular boop. Megan, in the front seat, went very still for exactly 1 second before she laughed it off. "Buddy, phones only make one boop sound." But I watched her hand tighten slightly on the door handle, and I filed that too, in the same drawer as Mrs. Hallworth's comment, and I told myself, again, that I was building a case out of nothing, the way anxious people do. Except I wasn't an anxious person. That was the thing. I had never once, in 10 years, gone looking for reasons to doubt Megan. Which is exactly why, when the reasons started arriving on their own, unbidden, I had no framework for what to do with them except to keep quietly filing them away and hoping the drawer would somehow close itself. The following Tuesday, I picked up her phone to check the weather. Mine was charging in the other room, and the screen was locked with a code I didn't know. We'd never had passcodes on our phones. 10 years, and the thought had simply never occurred to either of us. Now there was a 4-digit wall between me and a phone that had, less than 2 months earlier, been slid across a counter with an invitation to look at anything I wanted. I didn't ask her for the code. I want to be honest about why. Some part of me had already started doing the math on what asking would mean, and I wasn't ready for the answer. This is my mistake in this story, and I'll name it plainly, because pretending otherwise would make me a better man in this account than I actually was that spring. I had every opportunity to ask a direct question. I chose, again and again, the quieter road, the one where I gathered evidence in silence rather than risk a conversation that might end in words I couldn't take back. I want to stop here for a second, because if you've ever known, really known, in your body, before your mind caught up, that something was wrong, and kept moving through your days anyway, making lunches, going to work, laughing at the right moments, all while carrying that knowledge like a stone in your coat pocket you kept forgetting to take out and look at, you understand exactly what that may felt like for me. The following weekend, Megan told me she was going to a girls' trip to Branson with her college friend Whitney. One night, back Sunday afternoon. I drove the kids to my sister's for the day and came home to an empty house that felt, for the first time in 10 years, like it belonged to someone else. I called Whitney's number, which I had from a group text years back, meaning to ask what time they'd be back so I could plan Sunday dinner. Whitney picked up from her actual house in St. Louis, television loud in the background, and asked, confused, what Branson trip I meant. She hadn't talked to Megan in almost 2 months. I sat down on the stairs of my own house, phone in my hand, and I remember the specific quality of the silence in that hallway. Not peaceful, but waiting, like the house itself already knew something I didn't. I didn't call Megan. I didn't text her. I sat there for almost 20 minutes doing nothing at all except feeling something in my chest that I recognized, distantly, as the exact shape of the thing I'd been avoiding since March. That was the first time I truly started to doubt. Not suspect, doubt. There's a difference, and I hadn't understood it until that stairwell. Suspicion is a question you're still willing to have answered wrong. Doubt is what's left after you've already started building the answer yourself, in your own head, out of silence and a phone call to Whitney. I didn't know it then, but that same Saturday, while I sat on those stairs, she was 300 miles away in a hotel room outside Branson with Marcus, and she told me later what that weekend actually was for her. I remember standing at the window of that room telling myself this was the last one, the actual last one, and meaning it more than I'd meant it any of the other times. And then Marcus said something. I don't even remember what. Something small, some observation about the way I laughed at my own jokes. And I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. Not since before Lily was born. Maybe not since before I became someone's wife and someone's mother and stopped, somewhere along the way, being anyone else at all. I hated how good that felt. I hated myself for needing it. I told myself I would end it Monday. I believed it. The way you believe the last cigarette is the last one. That's what she told me. I knew none of it yet. I only knew Whitney had never heard of Branson. Megan came home Sunday at 4. Tan lines from a poolside I later learned didn't exist. A gift for the kids from a Branson souvenir shop. She must have stopped it specifically to complete the story. I hugged her at the door. I asked how the trip was. She said Whitney had been a mess about her breakup and they'd mostly just talked. I said that sounded nice. I did not say Whitney's name in any other context. I did not mention the phone call. That night, after she'd fallen asleep, I lay in the dark beside her and understood, with total clarity, that I now knew something was wrong, that I had proof of at least one specific lie, and that I had still chosen, again, to say nothing. I told myself I was giving her a chance to come to me on her own. I know now that wasn't generosity. It was fear, dressed up as patience. Once you know to look, you find things you'd walked past for weeks. I started keeping my own quiet ledger, not obsessively, not every hour, but steadily. The way you'd monitor a hairline crack in a foundation you weren't ready to admit was structural. Credit card statement. A hotel charge in late April I hadn't questioned because Megan said it was a client retreat her agency had covered. Except when I called the number on the statement, it wasn't a business rate, and the front desk clerk mentioned, when I asked casually about group bookings, that they didn't do corporate retreats, mostly couples. I didn't confront her. I told myself I needed more before I said anything, because an accusation without proof would only let her explain it away, and some part of me, the engineer's part, the part that doesn't sign off on a structure until the math is checked twice, wanted to be certain before I let this become real. That was true. It was also, I understand now, another way of postponing the moment I'd have to actually say the words out loud. 2 weeks passed like that. I noticed her checking her phone under the kitchen table during dinner, angling it toward her thigh. I noticed she'd started deleting her browser history, which I only discovered because I used her laptop once to print a boarding pass and found it wiped clean, a small digital nothing where 10 years of normal clutter should have been. I noticed Caleb, again, mentioned the boop sound, and this time Megan left the room to take the call in the garage and came back 12 minutes later with her eyes slightly red, telling me it was a work thing, a client being difficult. Red herrings crowded in during those weeks, the way they do when you're looking hard enough at everything. I became briefly, intensely suspicious of Megan's boss, a married man named Phil who traveled with her sometimes for client work. Followed a thread there for almost a week before realizing Phil's own marriage was, if anything, aggressively normal, and that I'd wasted days chasing the wrong shadow. I suspected, for one strange afternoon, that the changes were about money, that she was hiding some financial trouble from me, moving funds somewhere I couldn't see. I checked our accounts. Everything balanced. Nothing there. It was Lily who finally gave me the door, though she had no idea she was doing it. She'd started borrowing Megan's old phone, the one we kept as a backup, wiped and repurposed as a kid's tablet for games, still logged into some of Megan's old accounts because neither of us had ever bothered to fully separate it. One evening in late May, Lily brought it to me, confused, asking why Mommy's photo app kept showing her pictures of a man she didn't know. I want to be precise here, because precision matters in the moment your life changes. It wasn't a message. It wasn't even the main photo library. It was a private, secondary storage app, the kind that looks, at a glance, like a calculator, a habit I recognized instantly because I'd seen an ad for exactly that kind of app months earlier and thought, at the time, who would ever need that? Megan had installed it on the old device to back up photos before wiping the current phone for a software update back in April, and forgotten. Genuinely forgotten. In the small human way people forget the digital equivalent of a light left on in a room they never go back into, that it was still logged in, still syncing, still open. Lily hadn't found anything dramatic. Photos of a man I recognized from a company lobby 6 weeks earlier. A screenshot of a message thread, Just enough visible in the notification preview banner to read 3 words that told me everything the rest of the sentence didn't need to say. I sat Lily in front of a cartoon, told her mommy's app had a glitch, and took the device into the garage where I'd once imagined I might one day build cabinets. I sat on an overturned bucket in the dark for almost an hour, going through 8 weeks of a life I hadn't known I was living inside, while somewhere behind me the walls of the house held everything up the way they always had, the way I'd never once had to think about, because that was never supposed to be the part that broke. I didn't cry. I want to say that honestly, because I think people expect that moment to look a certain way, and mine didn't. I felt, instead, a kind of terrible clarity, the exact feeling of a beam finally showing you, after months of small, unexplained sounds, precisely where the crack had been the whole time. I photographed everything. Screenshots, dates, hotel confirmations that matched charges I already had. I built it like I build everything, methodically, in order, checked twice. I didn't tell Megan what I'd found. I spent 4 more days like that, moving through our house as a stranger to my own marriage, watching her make Caleb's lunch, watching her laugh at something Lily said, watching her lean over and kiss my cheek before work, and holding, the entire time, the specific and total knowledge of what those 3 words in that message thread meant. I remember thinking, on the 3rd night, lying beside her in the dark, I am not afraid of losing her. I am afraid of who I'll have to become to survive it. It took me a long time to understand those were not the same fear, and that only one of them was actually about Megan at all. I chose Friday. I don't know why Friday, except that the kids had a sleepover at my sister's and the house, for one night, would be empty of anyone who needed protecting from what was about to happen in it. I laid it out on the kitchen table before she got home. Hotel confirmation printed flat, the credit card statement circled in 3 places, the screenshots printed on regular paper, because some part of me needed them to be physical, undeniable, not something that could be explained away as a glitch or a misunderstanding. Megan came in at 6:15, dropped her bag by the door the way she did every night, and saw the table before she saw my face. She went very still. "Sit down," I said. My voice was quieter than I expected it to be. Not shaking, just quiet, the way a room goes quiet right before something falls. "What is this?" she said, and it wasn't a question. I went through it in order. The Branson trip Whitney knew nothing about. The hotel that didn't do corporate retreats. The phone in the garage, an app she'd forgotten, was still syncing. I didn't raise my voice. I laid out one piece, waited, laid out the next. "It's not what it looks like," she said, and I set the next photo on the table without answering, and watched her look at it and change her sentence mid-breath. "It's okay, something happened, but it wasn't. It's not what you're building it into." "What am I building it into?" I said. "You're acting like this is some whole thing." It was stupid. It didn't mean anything. People make mistakes when they're stressed. Ryan, you don't know what the last year has been like for me at work, with the kids, with. "How long?" I said. She didn't answer that directly. She said it wasn't like I thought. She said Marcus was just someone she talked to, that it had only really become anything a handful of times, that she'd already been trying to end it, that I was reading 5 separate things as one continuous story when really they were smaller, separate, less than what the pile of paper on the table made them look like. I want to be honest about what that moment felt like, because I think people imagine confrontation scenes as loud. Mine wasn't. I felt something in my chest go very cold and very organized, like a system shutting down non-essential functions to protect the core. I kept laying out the evidence. "Here's what I know. Here is what doesn't add up in your version." "Explain it." She minimized. Each piece I placed down, she found a smaller word for, a mistake, a lapse, a phase, never once the word I was waiting for. She said I'd invaded her privacy going through an old device. She said this wasn't a fair way to have a conversation, ambush and paperwork instead of talking like people who'd been married 10 years. I said, "You handed me your phone in March and told me to look." I did. There was nothing to see, because you already knew what to hide by then. That landed somewhere. I saw it land. Her mouth opened and nothing came out for a second, the first real crack in 8 weeks of careful denial. She didn't collapse. She didn't confess. She reframed. Again, one more time. Said it had already been ending on its own. Said she'd been about to tell me. Said the version I had wasn't the whole truth even if the facts were technically accurate. I let her talk. I didn't fill the silences. I placed the last photo on the table and didn't say anything else at all. We sat like that for almost a full minute, the two of us and a table of printed paper between us, and I understood, with the same cold clarity I'd felt in the garage, that she was never going to hand me the whole thing tonight. She was going to keep minimizing until I either accepted a smaller version of the truth or gave up trying to get the real one. I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't throw anything. I said, "I'm sleeping at my sister's tonight. Don't call. I need you gone from thinking I'll accept whatever version costs you the least." I took my keys. She said my name once, behind me, and I didn't turn around. I got in the car in the driveway of a house I'd lived in for 6 years and sat there for 10 minutes before I could make myself drive, hands steady on the wheel in a way that felt, if anything, more frightening than shaking would have. This is what she told me later, in her own words. What happened in that kitchen wasn't the moment she decided anything. It was the moment she ran out of smaller versions to offer and didn't yet know what the true-sized one would cost her. I sat at that table after he left, and I thought, so this is what it looks like when someone finally stops believing you. I'd gotten so good, over 8 weeks, at making the truth smaller, a little smaller here, a little more manageable there, that when he wouldn't take the small version anymore, I genuinely didn't have another one ready. I sat alone in my own kitchen with a stack of paper that had my whole spring laid out on it in his handwriting and his printer ink, and the thing I felt wasn't relief that it was finally out. It was fear, pure and specific, that I no longer had any control over how this story was going to end. That's what she told me, days later. That night, I only knew she hadn't followed me to the door. I stayed at my sister's for 4 nights. Rachel, my sister, didn't ask many questions the first night, just made up the guest bed and put a glass of water on the nightstand the way our mother used to, and let me sit at her kitchen table in silence until almost midnight. On the second night she asked, carefully, if I wanted to talk about it, and I told her most of it, and she listened without saying the things people say. I never trusted her. I always had a feeling. The easy, useless things that only exist to make the listener feel perceptive. She just said it was okay to be angry, and okay to be sad, and okay for those to be the same feeling some days. Megan texted twice a day. Short messages. Not begging. Not yet. Mostly logistics. Asking about the kids. Asking if we could talk when I was ready. I didn't respond to most of them. I noticed, with something like grim recognition, that even in her texts she was still managing the size of things, still keeping her language careful and controlled, still not saying the 4 words I was waiting to hear. The kids came home from Rachel's on Monday, and I moved back into the house that same day, because whatever was broken between Megan and me, I wasn't going to let it break the only steady thing Lily and Caleb had left that week. We slept in separate rooms. I took the guest room. Megan didn't argue. It took 9 more days before she told me the rest. She came to me on a Wednesday night after the kids were asleep, sat across from me at the same kitchen table, and asked if she could finally say the whole thing, without me interrupting, without me placing another photo down to correct her. I said yes. She told me everything, in her own words, and this is close to what she said. It started in February, at a work happy hour she almost hadn't gone to, a night she was tired and invisible and Marcus had said something. She couldn't even remember what exactly, some small observation, that made her feel noticed as a person and not just as somebody's wife, somebody's mother, somebody managing a household that ran on her invisible labor and nobody's thanks. That was the door. She told herself, that first time, that nothing had really happened, that a conversation lasting too long over drinks didn't count as anything, and she built the first lie small enough to swallow. Each time after that, she told herself a slightly bigger lie to make the growing thing feel survivable, that it was almost over, that it didn't take anything away from me or the kids, that a woman was allowed to feel like herself somewhere even if that somewhere wasn't home anymore. She was afraid the entire time, afraid of being caught, yes, but more afraid, she said, of what it meant that some stranger's attention had come to feel more necessary to her than her own family's love, which she'd apparently stopped being able to feel at all some months before Marcus ever said a word to her. The shame, she said, was in the smallest places. She couldn't look at Caleb's dinosaur drawings taped to the fridge on the mornings after. She started avoiding the school run because Denise's face at drop-off felt like an accusation even when it wasn't one. She said there was one night in April she almost told me everything, sitting right where I was sitting now, and stopped herself mid-sentence because she looked at me waiting for the end of a sentence about work and understood. In that second, that saying it out loud would make it permanently, unfixably true, and she wasn't ready to make it true yet. She kept choosing not ready, week after week, until I made the choice for her with a stack of paper on this same table. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I didn't offer forgiveness, and I didn't offer rage. I told her I believed, finally, that she'd told me the whole thing, and that believing her didn't mean I knew yet what I wanted to do with it. The consequences arrived the way real consequences do, not all at once, and not dramatically, but steadily, over the following weeks. Marcus was let go from the agency in July, after HR learned the relationship had involved a subordinate on Megan's team he'd also, it turned out, been pursuing, his own reputation collapsing at the office in a way Megan hadn't seen coming and couldn't protect him from even if she'd wanted to. He reached out to her once after that. She didn't respond. Whatever he'd represented to her had already stopped being about him specifically. It evaporated almost entirely once it no longer had a marriage to hide inside of. Megan lost things too, plainly, without me needing to make her lose them. She lost the version of herself she'd built her whole adult identity around. The reliable one, the trusted one, and had to sit with the fact that she'd have to rebuild that from nothing, in front of people who now measured her differently. Denise knew, somehow, the way small towns know things, and the school run got quieter around Megan for a long time. Lily asked, once, why Mommy slept in the guest room, and we told her the truth in the smallest words we could find, and she accepted it the way kids accept most things, with more grace than either of us had shown each other that spring. We didn't divorce. I want to say that plainly, without romanticizing it. I moved back into our bedroom in September, 5 months after the kitchen table, because by then Megan had done more than say the words. She'd gone to therapy alone for 4 months before I ever agreed to go with her. She'd rebuilt trust the boring, unglamorous way, through consistency rather than grand gesture, and I had done my own work too, on the conflict avoidance that let a small crack run for 8 weeks before I finally forced it into the light. She came back to the marriage. I let her. But the door I closed that Friday night at the kitchen table never fully reopened the same way. Some rooms in a marriage, once you've seen what's actually inside them, don't go back to looking like they did before. We built something different instead, quieter, more honest, less automatically trusting, which turned out, strangely, to be its own kind of strength. I think about that phone slid across the counter in March sometimes. I understand now that it wasn't proof of anything, and it also wasn't nothing. It was the first small lie built to buy time, and I took the time she was buying and spent it not asking the one question that would have ended things 8 weeks earlier than they ended. I'm not saying that to blame myself for her choices. Her choices were hers. But I've had to sit with the fact that my own instinct to avoid conflict, to smooth things over rather than confront them, gave that spring room to grow longer than it needed to. I realized something, sitting in that garage the night Lily showed me the app. I hadn't been protecting my marriage all those weeks by staying quiet. I'd been protecting myself from a truth I already half knew, and calling that protection something nobler than it was. Denial isn't weakness. It's a decision. You make it because the alternative costs more than you think you can afford, right up until the moment it costs you more to keep making it. The 2 red flags I ignored longest, the passcode that appeared out of nowhere after 10 years of none, and Whitney never hearing of a trip that supposedly included her, sat in my memory for a long time afterward as the exact places I could have stopped this 8 weeks sooner if I'd been willing to ask instead of file away. I don't carry that as guilt anymore. I carry it as the specific lesson this cost me. Silence isn't neutral. It's a choice with its own consequences, same as speaking would have been. The most painful detail in this story was never the affair itself. It was the passcode. 10 years of an open phone between 2 people, and then, almost overnight, a 4-digit wall that Ryan noticed and chose not to name. That single detail carries more of this marriage's real failure than any hotel receipt does, because it shows exactly where trust quietly became performance on both sides. She performed openness while building walls, and he performed calm while building a private ledger of everything he wasn't asking. What this account makes clear, looking at the whole arc rather than any single scene, is that Megan's affair wasn't really about Marcus, and Ryan's silence wasn't really about patience. Both of them were managing a slow disappearance. Hers, of a self she felt had vanished into wife and mother. His, of a willingness to risk conflict for the sake of clarity. The marriage didn't collapse in the kitchen in May. It had been eroding for over a year before that, in 100 small moments neither of them named out loud. And the affair was simply the point where the erosion finally became visible enough to measure. There's a particular kind of damage that accumulates specifically in couples who avoid confrontation well. Not badly, but well, the way Ryan did. Because he was good at not pushing, the cracks in his marriage had far longer to widen before anyone was forced to look at them directly. Megan, for her part, built an elaborate architecture of smaller lies specifically because she'd learned, over 10 years, that Ryan would rarely test them hard enough to make the architecture collapse. Their individual strengths, his calm, her competence, became, under pressure, exactly the mechanisms that let the deception run as long as it did. What ultimately separates this story from a simple betrayal narrative is that neither party gets to be only the victim or only the failure. Ryan's clarity in the confrontation scene, laying out evidence piece by piece without raising his voice, was the same instinct that had kept him silent for 8 weeks beforehand. Control, applied first to himself, and then, once he'd gathered enough proof, to the situation. Megan's minimizing in that same scene, and her honest confession weeks later, were both real. People rarely arrive at truth all at once, and the space between denial and full honesty is usually where the real work of a marriage either happens or doesn't. That's what makes me want to ask something of anyone who's sat across a kitchen table like that one. How much of what you're calling patience is actually just fear wearing a calmer face? If there's one thing I'd want someone listening to this to sit with, it's this. The 4-digit code on that phone was never really about hiding a text message. It was about the moment Megan started needing to protect something from the person she'd built her whole life with, and the moment Ryan noticed that need and decided not to ask about it out loud. Most affairs, I think, get discovered somewhere in that same quiet gap, not in the act itself, but in everything both people chose not to say around it. I don't know if every marriage that survives something like this comes back stronger, exactly. I think it comes back different, which isn't always the same thing, and isn't always worse either. If you've ever noticed something small, a passcode, a changed habit, a phone turned face down, and told yourself a kinder story than the one your gut was offering you, you already know exactly why Ryan waited 8 weeks. And if you've ever felt so invisible inside your own life that someone else's passing attention started to feel like oxygen, you understand something about Megan too, even if you'd never make the same choice she did. Tell me one word in the comments, the name, or just a word, for someone who let you down, or a moment you saw the red flag and looked away anyway. I've thought about that Tuesday in March more times than I can count, and I'm grateful, genuinely, for anyone willing to sit with me in it tonight.